Really interesting. Come here, we could stay all day, but we can't. Two last questions, if I may. A challenging time in your life, perhaps that's an obvious one, but maybe it's not. One moment in your life where you thought, this is too much for me. And then the second question is a highlight in your life that you're willing to share.
I guess the challenging one was the diagnosis. It was what followed. It was, I suppose, what was really challenging about it was managing myself. And that was tough. But once I managed myself, Liam is easy. You know, all he asks for is love. That's his main requirement, is people to love him. So that's certainly my challenge. My highlight, I've had loads of amazing highlights. I think probably, apart from the day I married my soulmate, I think one in recent times was getting Liam travelling independently on the Dublin bus when everybody else, the message was given to me loud and clear: he's a safety risk. He doesn't fit the category of trainable on public transport. So I said, no, I'm not accepting that. And if needs be, I'll do it myself.
Hello there and welcome to another Coffee with Colm, and thanks indeed for joining me. I'm delighted to let you know that today my special guest, Catriona Kirwan, a friend of mine and a colleague indeed from the Professional Speaking Association of Ireland. Catriona, you're very welcome. Pop in, say hi, cheers us with your coffee mug.
Hi Colm, I am delighted to be your guest on the show today.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure, and thanks indeed. We're recording these, folks, at 7 a.m. Midweek because we're both busy. So I want to thank Catriona for getting up early and turning up. Catriona, lovely to have you here. Thanks indeed for popping in. This season of Coffee with Colm is all around mental well-being, and we'll probably weave that into our chat. But before we go there, tell us who you are, what you do, where you're based, and all that good stuff.
Okay, so I'm Catriona. I am from Limerick originally, farmer's daughter, and I think that's where it all began, down in rural County Limerick. I went to UCD from there, and when I graduated as a radiographer, I moved off down to Cork, where I worked in Cork University Hospital on and off for the bulk of 20 years or so. And interestingly, I think this is a little unlike a lot of stories. It wasn't that I didn't like the job. I loved it. I love the people. I love the energy. The front line can be challenging, but it's very rewarding in that there's an awful lot of teamwork and bonding, and you always feel like you're part of a group. And it was a family move, actually, to Dublin that prompted me to leave radiography and leave Cork University Hospital. And during that time, I got married, I had 4 kids, and my second son was diagnosed with an intellectual disability. So I think that kind of changed my outlook and changed a lot of things. Wow. And when I moved to Dublin, I didn't have the support that I had in Cork.
All right. Let me stall you there. There's a lot to unpack in that already. Wow, that's whirlwind. Thank you for that. I loved the way in the middle of that you sort of threw in, and then I got married and had 4 kids. I was thinking there's a whole lifetime in that sentence, right? Okay, so let's stall the ball for a second here, right? Farmer's daughter. How did a farmer's daughter from rural County Limerick become a radiographer? How did that happen?
Interestingly, I was a farmer's daughter, but my mother was always very interested in education, and she was also from rural County Limerick. And at times, I suppose, in hindsight, we looked at her as somebody who was probably ahead of her time. She was the first girl in her school to go to UCD. So she had a thing about education, and she wanted us to be well educated. And she often said, I don't care if you never work. Knowledge is power, and education is very important. And that was one of her key values. So radiography, I knew I wanted to go into the caring profession. My sister was a nurse. I was never quite as caring as she was. I had thought about doing medicine. I did have I suppose the length of time in college and the financial constraints possibly in being in college for that long were factors. And then I always wanted to travel. So I remember we got the Sunday Independent every Sunday, and the whole back section was all on career opportunities. And radiographers travel the world. They were in high demand in exotic places like Australia, Dubai, those kind of places. And I just thought, right, well, I'll give it a go and see what happens.
That's wonderful. I love that, reading the Sunday paper and deciding a career based on based on a travel bug. And did you get to travel with it?
I surely did. I traveled a lot. And I think I set a goal on graduation with a couple of other friends that we would get traveling a year and a half after graduation. We were going to work hard, save and go, which was what we did. So we did, back then it was Trail Finders. They had all the exotic trips, and we did just over a year traveling around the world. And I worked in Australia on the way as a radiographer. Initially, not intentionally. I wanted to do something different, and I think I lasted one night as a waitress. The butter fell out of my hand, Colm, and it landed upside down on the floor. So
Thus the term butterfingers. I love it. No, that's brilliant. I love that. I lasted one night as a waitress. Now, come here. That's wonderful. That's just fantastic. There's real richness in that. I'm delighted I asked the question, because would have been just very easy to skip over that. But you see, all these experiences that we have come together to form the people we are today. And part of the challenge, I think, is that people meet us today as we are today, all of us, and they think, in certain cases, they think we've got our act together, right? And for many of us, we don't. And, you mentioned your second son, I think it is your second child, has a challenge. So we'll talk about that in a sec, if you don't mind. But, meeting you in the street, nobody would know that. Nobody would know that you're going home to, or have perhaps in the past gone home to a challenging situation. And I suppose that's part of what's driving this particular season of Coffee with Colm, is just to get real people in for a chat, to let others know that if you're going through stuff out there, there are other people also who have gone through similar stuff or their own stuff, but it's still stuff. And we need to be aware that, as we present ourselves in the corporate world or in the professional world, it's not, we might slap on a smile, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's hunky-dory. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I think that's why I stayed in CUH for so long. Part of it, well, I had 2 hours hard work done before I arrived into the hospital. The mornings were chaotic because I had 4 children under 6 years of age, and one with a challenge. My husband traveled a lot, so, a lot of the responsibility in the home fell to me. But in the hospital, in my tribe, there was an awful lot of support. And when I get in, depending on who I was working with, it was almost entertainment value listening to the chaos that I had come out of. And people regularly asked me, Catriona, why are you here? I mean, how do you even get here? But the reason I was there was it was a little bit isolating at home when my husband traveled so much. And I was there because it was my adult conversation. It was my purpose. I loved chatting to the patients. And I suppose that's how I found out eventually what I was best at. It wasn't the technical. I can hand on heart say I was not technically the best radiographer in CUH, but I had a great way with people. And I loved chatting. I loved the interactions. I loved sort of getting people into conversation to kind of hear and see what they were about. And of course, most patients, my last job was setting up and running the breast imaging unit in CUH. And most patients coming in there, it's a symptomatic unit as opposed to a screening unit. So everybody coming in was being sent there for a reason. And most of them were terrified. And I suppose what I really got to know and understand was in conversation, you could get so much more out of people when you connected with them. A simple introduction, hello, how are you? Where are you from? How are you feeling this morning? And suddenly they've relaxed. And of course, years later in studying neuroscience and actually figuring out where all that comes from, I now look back and sort of think, oh, if I really knew and understand it then, what I know now, it would probably even have been a little more different, you know.
Yeah, okay, but don't beat yourself up. It seems like you did a great job, and I love that you identified that these people are fearful. They're coming in here. They've been sent here. There's something going on that needs checking out, and the worst place that anybody could find themselves with a challenge is in a sterile environment where just a number, and you're getting through a battery of tests. So to meet somebody like Catriona Kirwan must have been a joy, and takes changes the dynamic of the thing. I read something as it happens this morning. I'm an early riser, right? As it happens, I read something on social media, and it was Howard Schultz. He's the CEO of Starbucks. Maybe he's not at the moment, but he's the founder, certainly. And he said, when we started the business, we thought we were in the coffee business serving people. And then we realized we're in the people business serving coffee. And that's what came to mind when you explained what you're doing. Entertainment value, that's interesting. I can sense it. I'm sure it wasn't intended in any way as a negative, but your colleagues couldn't believe what you went through to get there. Are you happy to talk to us about your son's challenge and how that manifested?
Yeah, it was certainly a shock. It was something that turned my world upside down. I was on maternity leave. My first son was a bouncing 9.5 pounds boy, and my second son was just over 6 pounds. But I'm quite small, so I was told at the time that was probably more a weight that would be expected, so I didn't think anything of it. And my husband at the time was working in Belfast, and he had been commuting. So I thought, well, why not go to Belfast for my maternity leave? And I moved to Belfast, and the NHS is quite a different service, and I wasn't long there when the public health nurse, all the sort of support I may or may not expect with a newborn baby, was started. And when she came out to see me, she did all the measurements, and she sort of raised a flag around his head size. And it was just monitored. And a few months later, then I ended up in front of a pediatrician who told me that he did have a challenge. He had an intellectual disability, and she used maybe slightly harsher words to describe it. And I suppose I was just catapulted into a world of chaos. And even though my husband was with me on the day, and we had talked about it going in the car, and maybe we were expecting it, but what I wasn't expecting was my own reaction, really. I was shocked. I couldn't get my head around it. And an intellectual disability, you know, she didn't mince her words. She sort of projected the future for me. And suddenly I had visions of all these institutions of days gone by. And, you know, I was now going to be part of that world. And how was I going to cope? So yeah, there was a lot of silence. I'm grateful now that I was in Belfast because we got an earlier diagnosis. Also, I didn't have the world that I knew around me. I knew very few people, so it gave me time to let it bed in. Now, that had its positives and negatives, but I certainly think it stood to me in the beginning so that I was able to sort of articulate a little better what was going on by the time I you know, was with people I knew.
Wow, some story. Interesting how the universe conspires in our stories, you know, and that you found yourself in Belfast where you believe you got an earlier diagnosis. I was just thinking about the person who delivered the news to you. She was no Catriona Kirwan, that's for sure. It was delivered quite harshly.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Certainly not. I still shudder when I see and think about the words that day.
Wow.
And it does have an impact because we were moving back to Cork then, you know, within, I suppose, 9 months. And the whole thing started then about the transfer. How was all that going to work? And the pediatrician I met in Cork was like an angel sent to me. She was just the complete opposite, smiley face. And, you know, she said to me, unfortunately, I can't change the diagnosis, even though I still held on to hope. But the way she delivered it and sort of, she said, look, we're in this with you and we're here to help you and offer whatever supports. And that was reassuring, just to have somebody to cling on to, because it's a very, very isolating space. And I talk a lot about this. And I did a talk for carers the week before last. And one of the biggest challenges is that sense of isolation. Nobody, and it's a perception, you know, a perception that nobody really gets it. You know, they give you the nod. And my older son, he's a bright spark, but he used to always talk about the way people looked at us. And I had 2 younger daughters. Instant mother reaction, I suppose, after the diagnosis. I thought, right, if anything happens to his dad and myself, it's a lot for my older son to have to manage. And I knew on the spot I wanted more children. And I had 2 daughters subsequently.
That's really interesting, because I was going to ask that question, which perhaps it has naivety behind it, but, you know, having had a challenging diagnosis for your second child, I perhaps assumed that the natural thing would be, well, maybe we should stop now. So it's interesting to hear you explain the thinking behind it, and very logical thinking. What are their names, top to bottom?
Oisín, Liam, Kate and Maeve.
It broke up slightly. Oisín?
Oisín, Liam, Kate and Maeve.
Oisín, Liam, Kate and Maeve. And your husband's name?
Dave.
Dave.
Yeah.
Great, good stuff. Yeah, well, nice to meet them all. Thanks for bringing us into your family. And how old are they now? How old is?
Oisín is 21. He's in college. Liam is 19. He's gone into adult services, which brings a whole new set of challenges. Kate is our lively, chatty, life and soul of the party 17-year-old, and Maeve is quite a different personality than she's 15. But all very, very different. And I'm into personality profiling. Colm, in my role as a coach, I do a lot of personality profiling, and it's interesting each of us in the house have very different profiles. There's none anyway alike, which is great because we're a very, very strong team.
Yeah, great.
And everybody brings something very different. And I suppose we established, that was part of my doing. I established early on that that's what we would be, and that there would be ups and downs, and that everybody would share those, you know, that there wouldn't be resentment or he gets it all and we, you know, that we'd all be in it together. And that started with very basic things like going to Tato Park. Liam got a pass to skip the queue. So he was so dizzy the first time we went to Tato Park from each of them saying, come on, Liam, come with me. We don't have to queue. And, you know, he's a special traveller. So he has a special traveller little lanyard, and they love skipping the queue in the airport and, you know, bringing him to the top, and they're so proud of him. And yeah, they're really, really great with him.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. Because I was going to ask that question. That was another question rattling around in my head, was that it's very interesting because anecdotally I'm aware of families where there's a challenging situation for one child and the other siblings are oftentimes in the shadow of that. Everything is focused on. So that's really interesting. But it also sounds like you crafted that, Catriona, if I may be so bold as to point that out, that you identified this is going to be a challenge. Let's all get behind it together.
Yeah. And that was the idea of the two angels that came later, as I'll call them. I just felt there was safety in numbers. It wasn't something I wanted to take on myself. So I reprioritized. I knew my husband and I are polar opposites in personality types, and what he's strong on, I'm not, and what I'm strong on, he's not so strong on. So I needed us to connect and work well together. So that was a priority for me. And then if we were good, the children would be good with it because they're sponges. They just copy everything they see. And as long as their needs were being met and they could see that this was normal life. And in fact, I see my older daughter was always interesting on it. She judged people by how they reacted to her brother. And, you know, it was, I used to watch it and they talk about it. They talk about it among themselves. They talk about it at the dinner table, particularly when they were younger. And I think my older son, his instinct is very strong to protect. And I think he was about 6 when he came in running one day. Liam had been out playing with him and he came in and he was hysterical. And I thought, oh my God, what could have happened? And when I calmed him down, he said to me, there's a new boy in the park, and he laughed at Liam. And it was, I just thought, wow. So I calmed him down and explained to him that, you know, Liam was different and that I'm sure the boy didn't mean anything by it. And when he'd get to know him and understand him, he probably wouldn't laugh at him. But that was an interesting thing from early on. And he's continued to protect him, to kind of lead, I suppose, lead him, and they have great conversations, even though Liam is nonverbal. And he probably only picks up snippets. So when my older son, you know, when he was doing his leave insert, when he has stressful times, he'd come in and he'd talk to Liam, almost de-stressing. And he still does it. Right. You know, or if he's trying to tell me something, he doesn't want to speak directly, you know, he'll say it to Liam in earshot. Or, you know, and it would be something like, oh, Mom doesn't know what she's talking about, or, you know, something like that. But it's interesting to watch.
Well, it's beautiful to listen to. It really is. It's lovely. You know, you've described a lovely family situation. So congratulations to you and Dave and all involved, your two little angels and Dave, and of course, especially Liam. The fulcrum of it all is perhaps interesting. We don't try to go into this today, I don't think, but it's interesting. It would be interesting to explore your family situation if Liam hadn't been diagnosed, right? That would be an interesting further conversation somewhere down the track. Come here, Catriona. Kirwan coaching. What do you do?
I help individuals really to understand that they always have a choice, to make choices with intention so that they can flourish personally and professionally. And I suppose it's a lot of eliminating the I have to, I'm stuck, I must do, that type of thing. And my three words are clarity, control, and confidence. So it's clarity around the who am I and what do I want, control over my choices and decisions. And I think I see that an awful lot, Colm, the perception that I don't have a choice. And I've lived that experience. I felt like that for a long time in my own life, and I've addressed it, and it's liberating to know that, yes, I do always have a choice. And the third C then is the confidence to go out, take control over your choices and decisions, and lean into your clarity and actually achieve what that's telling you. That's sort of how it all fits. I do a lot of teamwork as well. I do a lot of talk on stress management and energy management. Those were things that I found really challenging. And when I studied neuroscience, how the brain works, the brain is a beast, but when you know and understand it, it can be tamed, and it can be, after all, it is plastic. It can be rewired right into old age to think differently. And when we think differently, we do differently, and we become different. So change is possible at any stage in life if you're willing to take the first step.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question. That's fantastic. That's I love clarity. In fact, there's your first point: clarity, control, and confidence, right? But I love clarity. I love listening to somebody who's clear about what they do and why they do it. But because by extension, they know what they don't do, and they don't waste time, you know, chasing down rabbit holes. So well done you. And it's interesting. I think it's probably fair to say your life journey up to the point that you founded Catriona Kirwan Coaching led you to the space. You know, you didn't pivot and become something entirely different. It's built on your own personal foundation. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and certainly the neuroscience, the reactions, the stress part. Hospitals are full of stress from the patients and stress from the staff. And when stress meets stress, it's sometimes not the best look. And I suppose a lot of it, when I worked in cardiology, a lot of the indications for certain tests were work stress or professional stress or stress of some sort. And at the time, I didn't really make the connection. But afterwards, when, you know, since I've studied it, understanding that stress isn't something that just rattles around in our heads. It's our whole body is involved. And the modern world now, a huge percentage of people just ping pong from stressor to stressor. And it leads to ongoing unmanaged stress, which leads to full hospitals. And most illnesses now, if not caused by stress, they're driven or exasperated by stress. Yeah. And what I find is in a lot of my webinars and workshops, there's huge aha moments when people understand maybe why they're feeling as they feel and what's really going on. And stress is all about resistance. It's about fear. And somewhere in that, there's a story that I don't have the capacity to take on what's in front of me.
Oh.
And it's that story, that perception that drives the stress reaction. And even the simple thing like driving out of your drive in the morning when the traffic is backed up, I don't have the capacity to be where I need to be on time. So it's a continual perception.
Well.
So I continually ask people to pause, stop, check in. Where is my body at? Where's my story at? Do I really need to be here? Because when we're in that fight or flight or stress state, it's a huge energy sapper.
Of course, yeah.
And a great question is this a good use for my energy right now? And that's a question I continually had to ask myself. And in hindsight, I look at a lot of wasted energy spent stressing the small stuff.
Where do you carry your stress? I carry mine in my feet. That's the reason I asked the question.
Well, that's one that's come up in lockdown, the curly toes under the desk. So when, on webinars, I would ask people to check their feet. I carry mine in my shoulders and my neck. Instantly, I will get neck spasm.
I worked out why I hypothesized as to why I carry mine in my feet. I grew up in the hospitality space, to turn up and, look the part and pretend to be in charge and all the rest of it in a restaurant situation. And but there were stresses, and the only way I could deal with the stress was to push it down to my feet where nobody could see it. So I'd lock myself. I found myself planted to the floor in stressful situations. But you and I standing there chatting with a cup of coffee, you'd never know. But it was killing me. It was killing me. So I'm curious about it. Like fascinating work and such important work you're doing. I really love that clarity, control, and confidence to take even just the next step. I think people get overwhelmed by they overthink what's going to have to change in my life to make change in my life, and it's going to take forever, and they fail to take the first step. And really, that's the key, in my opinion. Take that first step towards something, and then just keep stepping. Really interesting. Come here. We could stay all day, but we can't. Two last questions, if I may. A challenging time in your life, perhaps that's an obvious one, but maybe it's not. One moment in your life where you thought, this is too much for me. And then the second question is a highlight in your life that you're willing to share.
I guess the challenging one was the diagnosis. It was what followed. It was, I suppose, what was really challenging about it was managing myself. And that was tough. But once I managed myself, Liam is easy. All he asks for is love. That's his main requirement, is people to love him. So that's certainly my challenge. My highlight, I've had loads of amazing highlights. I think probably, apart from the day I married my soulmate, I think one in recent times was getting Liam travelling independently on the Dublin bus when everybody else, the message was given to me loud and clear: he's a safety risk. He doesn't fit the category of trainable on public transport. So I said, no, I'm not accepting that. And if needs be, I'll do it myself. So I did, and it took me probably 8 to 9 months when I brought him down to, we live just off the N11, Colm, I don't know if you know it, but it's a busy thoroughfare. So I went down to the bus morning after morning with him, got the correct bus out to Bray, where he got off. We walked down, crossed a couple of roads and into his college. Repeated the same thing in the evening, moved my business to the middle of the day. And on days when my husband was working from home, he'd actually drop me down to sort of save the whole bus journey. But 9 months later, he got it, and he's doing it now. And I think I can say hands down that is probably my biggest achievement.
Bula bus, that's just wonderful. That's a lovely story. It reminds me, it's a theme that has popped up a few times already in this season, which is the fierceness of the Irish mammy. Right? How dare you tell me what my child can or cannot do? How dare you? You're not qualified to say that. So congratulations to you. Lovely point that you made. Right, I'm going to give you the last word. Stay where you are for 1 second, please, Catriona. Folks, wasn't that amazing? Thanks indeed for being part of this episode of Coffee with Colm. Hope and trust as ever you got something from it. Please consider what's been shared here today and apply it into your thinking for this next week, and then come back next week and we'll share another coffee together and we'll meet some other guest. In the meantime, get some good coffee for sure, get some fresh air and R&R. If you spend too much time alone, please go meet some people. Conversely, if you spend too much time with other people, please take some time out and get to know yourself a little. And then when the time is right, and only when the time is right, get your head back in the game, get organised for the week ahead, get stuck in, make next week count, and we'll see you here this time next week for another Coffee with Colm. Sláinte. But in the meantime, final word to Catriona Kirwan.
Thank you, Colm. It's been a pleasure. Final word, know that you always have a choice. Pause, breathe, and lean into your why.